Hey, good afternoon, everybody. And I'm super, super excited for today's podcast. Joining me today, I'm sitting in Kyle's seat, which is a little bit fun for me. I'm a heavy operations person and technically not a podcast host. So I'm super excited to be here, but really, really excited for our guest. So today we are with J.W. Taylor at Taylor & Associates. And I think, we have some common backgrounds in that as a company, we spend a lot of time on shipper education as it relates to transportation. The backbone of our company here at Aborn & Co., it really is freight operations. And then we brought in all this technology to help support freight operations. But I'll tell you, as we bring in new business, and I've been here for almost 30 years, a big piece of the work we do is really sharing with our clients what an industry best practice is and then what are the rules. So super excited to have you, JW. If you could just give us a little bit of background on yourself and also who is Taylor & Associates?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jill. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm as excited as you are about the conversation today. And for all your listeners, here's the good news. It's not another recitation of case law. It's not talking about the things that you hear over and over again. What we want to talk about today, as I understand it, Jill, is what happens in the supply chain between shippers, motor carriers, freight forwarders, and those things we'll be talking about. And it's the message that I love to give to our world of the supply chain. Taylor & Associates is a national law firm. And we have a unique boutique practice, Jill, as we call it. And we represent transportation and logistics companies from here. By the way, I'm in beautiful Winter Haven, Florida, right here, the home of the Chain of Lakes, and also Legoland. So right here. We also have Tampa Bay offices and Miami. So here in Florida, but we represent, as corporate counsel, trucking, motor carriers, brokers, warehousing, and even shippers, freight forwarders, anything in the transportation world we touch, from here to California, to Chicago, to New Mexico, and the EU. And we're awful proud, as you can tell, awful proud to represent our men and women in the transportation world. So that's what we do here every day, all day long.
Well, good. So it sounds like I have the right guest if we're going to start talking about shipper education. I think my style, and it sounds like it might be yours, is we're going to chat if you don't mind. I'm not really good with the script, and I do think this subject is so immensely important. What we find and what I've always found in working in freight operations is folks don't understand even the most basic levels of the rules of engagement, the laws behind the rules of engagement. As simple as your bill of lading is a legal document. A lot of folks don't know that. And I think gone are the days where you can, as a shipper or someone who's purchasing outsourced transportation from carriers, gone are the days where it used to be everyone just blamed the carrier. The carrier was the last person to touch the freight. The carrier must have screwed that up. You used to be able to get away with that, and those days are over, and they're over because of the technology that has come into our market and continues to get better and better and better. And so it used to be, you would scorecard your outsourced transportation providers as a shipper. Well, guess what? Now they're scorecarding you. So this education just becomes so much more important. So give us a little bit of insight, if you could, just say you're that shipper who really doesn't have a good understanding. Where do they get themselves in trouble, in your opinion? Why is that education so important in your world? How do you see it?
Well, gosh, Jill, you said so many things. I don't think we have enough time today, just in your introduction. And I like what you said, the rules of engagement, and just the little things that are poorly understood. But things are changing. And I believe it is the digital platforms that maybe we get an opportunity at some point to talk about, and scorecarding and all those things. But really, it's what, Jill, you're doing today. It's educating. It's getting everyone in the supply chain to listen. Consulting Logistics is doing that. We're doing that. By the way, we're doing it in ways different than you. And what you're doing is better than what I have to do to educate people, if you know what I mean. And so I'd rather talk about it here. For instance, you're right. A lot of people, shippers, by the way, I'll give you an example since you used it. The straight bill of lading, by the way, written in 1923. It is a contract, Jill. You're absolutely right. And by the way, did you know on the back of the straight bill of lading, there are 9 different terms? And it's all written. It's the CARMAC. It's the bill of lading law. And that's there. It applies. The folks don't understand it. Hey, shippers. Hey, everybody in transportation. Why don't you read those terms and become familiar with them? These are the things we're talking about. You have no idea how many people are surprised when I say, no, there's actually terms to the bill of lading law. And they're right on the back of the bill. But JW, they're not on there because we don't print them anymore. 1923, we ought to know them by now. And so that's kind of where it's, but they do apply. And another thing you said, I think is really important that I want to stress, it kind of leads into what we're speaking about. Yeah, everyone for many, many years, and I got to tell you, Jill, even today, more than I like, say, hey, you took the load, motor carrier, it's your problem. Strict liability. You took it, your problem, you got to pay it. I don't want to hear anything else about it. And the problem with that, and I hope I get to say it more than once, that is not what the CARMAC Amendment, for instance, in cargo claims, that's what controls that, a whole nother program.
Okay, so hang on one sec. I want to go back to that because it's really important. Claims are, they're in everybody's environment if you're using outsourced transportation, right? So if you're shipping and you're using outsourced transportation, whether it be a broker or a direct asset carrier, you're going to have claims, right?
Oh, yes.
So what did you just say legally drives the claim?
So for any inland marine, that's on land, cargo loss in interstate commerce, it is controlled by 14702, anyway, the CARMAC Amendment. And yes, surprisingly, education, lots of shippers have never even looked at the CARMAC Amendment, do not know what it says. Even motor carriers and even folks within the shipping world don't understand what the CARMAC Amendment does or what it says. They just think motor carriers liable. It's just not true.
So if you haven't looked at it, can you give us maybe like a couple of high-level bullets that are critical to understand if you're shipping in that inland marine environment, which is essentially the ground transportation, right?
Right. Inland marine. Okay. By the way, so in blue water, it's COSGA. It's a CARMAC COSGA. But just generally, yes. Here's what it does say. If you, shipper, give motor carrier a load and they accept that load and it is presumed to be in good condition, doesn't mean it is, presumed. What does that mean? Yep. That means that the motor carrier under the law bears the burden of proving they didn't damage it when it arrives damaged. And there's only 5 defenses to it. Only one really counts. It's act of God and those types of things, but shipper negligence is one of those 5 things. So what I'm trying to tell you, Jill, without getting too technical, is it's close to strict liability once motor carrier takes it, but it's not strict liability. And so between that comes many, many years of case law regarding the CARMAC Amendment. And again, Jill, that'd be another great one for us to talk about one day because it is educational for shippers and anyone in our industry. But I would like to come back to just that because the CARMAC Amendment applies to cargo moved in interstate commerce between shipper and motor carrier. Who did I not say? Broker. And we know brokers in there all the time, right? CARMAC Amendment does not apply to brokers' claims. So let's talk about the thing that I found is if I'm talking to shippers, which I do, is do we really know who the players are in the supply chain? Well, I know I'm a shipper. I'm talking to motor carriers, or I should say, normally, Jill would say, well, I'm talking to the carriers. I'm like, who's a carrier? Well, the guys with the trucks. So let me just give you just a real quick rundown. I'm not going to quote the definitions, but if you look them up, it's under 49 USC, I think 13102 or something like that. But there is actually written definitions for all our players in the industry. For instance, a broker is the in-between, the intermediary that sells its service to put shipper and motor carrier together. A broker is not a carrier. It doesn't have carrier liability. Go back to CARMAC, go back to catastrophic claims that we may end up with here in the end. A carrier. Did you know a carrier is a what? It's a motor carrier, but it's also a freight forwarder. And it's also the NVOCCs, the blue water shippers. So carrier is not just one thing. So we must be specific. If you're
okay, so I have a question about that.
All right.
The NVOCC, which is considered the blue water service, they are following, they're legally under the CARMAC guidelines?
No, so they're legally defined as a carrier. And so what law applies to their cargo claims is not CARMAC, it's COSCA. And so, but the point I'm trying to make is a carrier is more than just a motor carrier.
Right, but if you are shipping in multiple modes though, so if I'm a shipper, it's interesting to me that, and I just don't want this getting missed because it's important, is I may look at that NVO, that freight forwarder, as an intermediary, just like my ground US, say, transportation broker, and they're not.
They're not.
Based on law, they're not, they're different.
Based on the federal regulations, a freight forwarder is a carrier. Right. It is not a broker, often confused. By the way, why is that important? Well, it's important to shippers because a freight forwarder does take motor carrier liability. It's important. Correct. But then there are non-asset-based freight forwarders. So the point being is in the educational process, I want our shippers, I want all of our transportation people to know that there are places you can go. We should all be speaking the same nomenclature, but there are definitions. So as you and I know, as we walk around our world, not only the transportation world, but our world in general, broker. What is a broker? Oh my gosh. There's real estate brokers, there's business brokers. We are what's called a property broker. And it's not the best term, but that's what a trucking broker is. It's a property broker. And so we want to understand those differences because, hear me on this, missing those differences in your operations or shipper who you decide to engage to provide you services can be detrimental. You think you're talking to a motor carrier and you were talking to a broker the whole time, shipper, and they don't have, for instance, cargo liability. So very, very important to understand that. And I spend a good deal of my time unraveling that. And by the way, educating plaintiffs' counsel about why they don't have a claim and those types of things. And so it would be helpful. And by the way, Jill, we're not here today to pick on shippers. We love our shippers. They're very sophisticated. They produce and move what it is that makes our life here in America what it is and across the world. But we have these opportunities to communicate, to educate each other. By the way, a shipper is not a carrier. A shipper is not a broker. A shipper is not a freight forwarder. A shipper is a beneficial owner in the goods being moved. So why is that really important to shipper? Because if shipper is on the bill of lading that you mentioned earlier as the motor carrier, might it take on motor carrier liability? Possibly. Does a shipper ever want to be a motor carrier for liability purposes? No. And so,
have you seen that where you have a shipper on a bill of lading as a motor carrier?
I have seen.
How would that relate?
Yeah, right. I have seen bills of lading where, when we all get done, we're all still scratching our heads as to why in the world did that name end up there? And so, it may be to take what I think you're asking me further is, should shippers be concerned about motor carrier liability? Well, that's the holy grail for plaintiffs' counsel, isn't it? To get to the shipper. And shippers haven't been historically held liable for the actions of that third party independent contractor motor carrier. There is a case called Puckrin back in, I believe it was 2015, don't quote me on that, and the selection by the shipper of that motor carrier was deemed negligent, and at that point then the shipper had some problems with that case. But generally, no, especially if we keep them separated by these definitions, and probably some things you want to talk about contractually as well.
Yeah, I'm just curious, based on your practice and your years in the industry, you know, the shippers that aren't necessarily schooled or educated the way that they should be, where do you see them getting in the most amount of trouble?
Well, in lots of different ways. Gosh, I think, you know, to be practical, it's the day-to-day stuff, isn't it? So what would be the day-to-day stuff that gives shippers heartburn? Well, it's cargo claims. It's the loss of their goods not getting there, and not having in place any type of management of expectations, aka contracts. Those things not being done and done properly. So those are the day-to-day headaches in regards from the legal side, trying to deal with claims and motor carriers and the processes and procedures to selecting motor carriers, very important. Or selecting brokers, very important. That's a day-to-day struggle I see for shippers. I think if you ask shippers about that, they'd probably tell you the same. It's that day-to-day communications with motor carriers, getting stuff done, right, in the supply chain.
Right. Got it. Where do you see, you know, oftentimes broker sounds like a bad word to shippers. But what we see in our industry, if you're working with the right one, they are providing that level of expertise surrounding, you know, what is a good best practice when you are negotiating contracts with carriers, and really understanding the rules of engagement. Typically, if you're in an environment where you're using an outsourced 3PL broker, I think shippers, you know, really have actually with the right one, you have the ability to really get schooled in the right way and the shipper education around it. But there is still this mindset that if I'm a shipper, and not just on cargo claim and loss, but around payment, right? So, you know, legally, who's responsible for payment to that underlying asset? You know, those are all things that I think we spend a lot of time talking about here, because our clients do use, they use brokers, they use assets, and they use brokers. And in fact, we have, we are also, you know, labeled that broker. For lack of, you know, again, I think people see it as a bad word, but we see ourselves as a fully integrated solution with our clients from order down to carrier invoice. And it's our passion, honestly. It's immensely important that we understand the rules of engagement when we are engaging with a carrier to move goods on behalf of one of our clients. And so I do think, you know, again, with education, all of the shippers can make some really good decisions on how they're going to move their freight. And I'd be curious to know, you know, we know why the education is so important as folks in the industry and having some of that experience. But do you, in your world and in your business, are these shippers coming to you after the fact, after there is a problem, or are you seeing some, you know, some real due diligence around, look at, I'm going to get myself in the best position I can. I'm going to understand the rules of engagement with carriers, and I'm going to put in a best practice as it relates to working with those carriers. Are you doing that kind of work as well?
Absolutely. You stated differently. Are shippers coming to me for the help when dealing with the transportation rule? Absolutely. Many good shippers out there, very sophisticated operators, and that's a good thing. Because if you look at risk across the supply chain, that's what we're really talking about here, managing risk, supply chain risk management, is if we do it right, we can properly contract from shipper all the way around the supply chain. We can ensure all the way around in the right way, the right prices. By the way, Jill, we got to get it right. Because if we don't get that right, all that happens is the cost of cabbage goes up. Guess who pays for that?
Yeah.
Me and you. Me and you. And it's just like you said, our shippers and quite frankly, our transportation world more eager to learn and sources. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that. Yes. But just like you said a second ago, for instance, ship broker is not a bad word. I know what you're talking about because there's many bad actors, as we call it, out there that have caused that to happen. But if you're doing business, and you should know who you're doing business with brokers, it can be what you just said, Jill, an incredible asset because a broker does have a duty, and that is to properly vet motor carriers. Listen, I'm just a shipper, Jill. I don't know anything about that. I just know I got to get it moved. I don't want to be liable for it. I don't want to be responsible for it. Is that what you do? If you're good at it, then you do your job. I'll do my shipping job. And everybody does their job around the supply chain. You said just a second ago, for instance, 3PLs. Hey, by the way, what is the definition of a 3PL? You say, is it a broker? Well, 3PL is a third-party logistics. I think it might be a broker, but why not just call it a broker? Well, and there's actually, in the C.H. Robinson Spurl case, the $23 million cargo, claim, against C.H. Robinson Spurl case, Annette Sandberg was asked that question. What is a 3PL? Well, there is no definition for 3PL. That's not one of the ones I read you a moment ago, is it? It's something different than a broker. And so now we have 3PLs, 4PLs, and depending on what
So what's the difference?
A third-party logistics company provides something more than a broker does. Remember, under the definition of broker, it's an arranger of transportation with an authorized motor carrier. And so a 3PL is going to provide you something more than that. For instance, it could be invoicing services. It could be some type of back office services. A 4PL often provides, for instance, IT type end-to-end solutions. And you say, wow, so does that change the liability scheme? It can. Ask C.H. Robinson and many others. So,
and just for the audience, JW, can you, I don't know that everybody's heard of this $23 million claim against C.H. Robinson, just high level. And it, again, I don't want to, certainly talk in a negative way about any service provider, but if we're going to talk context around it, it'd be good to hear.
I'll give you the lawyer layman 30,000 on a Spurl. Obviously, was the motor carrier, or Spurl was the injured party, and C.H. Robinson was the broker, and argued the whole case. I'm just a broker, and C.H. Robinson is a broker. And guess what C.H. Robinson did? It brokered to a motor carrier by the name of Toadell Dragonfly. Now that should have been a heads up right away, but anyway, so brokers just loaded Toadell Dragonfly that looked like it was authorized and had the things. Well, long story short, the driver didn't have her CDL, and there's all these bad situations there. And the importance of this was C.H. Robinson was deemed to be the motor carrier. And there's different reasons why. It's an interesting case, and these are fact driven. But the big part of that is we took away from that is we need to have the right written policies and procedures in place for motor carrier vetting or motor carrier selection.
Correct.
And we do that. That's a lot of the stuff we do. When my firm goes in, we do a lot of structuring and restructuring companies. We look at all of these risks. We tighten up things that are good and make them better. And that'd be one of them, the motor carrier vetting policy. So that's a very famous case. Get a chance, read it, and we can talk about those types of broker exposures and the current case law regarding whether certain state law claims are exempted and something called F Quad A. So lots of stuff there. The point you're making is, hey, shippers, come alongside of us. Let's learn this together. Let's talk the same talk. So when I talk about this case, because my job as a broker, or maybe even as a motor carrier, is to what? Protect my customer. You're my customer.
Right.
And we're on the supply chain together. So
Right.
let's work that way.
And I think if we stick with the theme of our podcast, which is staying educated, if you are working with an outsourced 3PL, 4PL broker and you're a shipper, really understanding if you're doing a vetting process and working with someone who's going to help you manage a piece of your supply chain as it relates to working with the carriers, really understanding what the service is and what their vetting process is. I chuckled when you said that the underlying asset carrier name, but the reality is our industry, especially in the full truckload market, is made up. The majority of that full truckload freight that's moving today, I think 12% of it is running with the Schneiders and the Werners of the world. The rest of it's on trucks of companies with 3 drivers, 5 drivers, 6 drivers. Much of that industry is with these really smaller local size assets. And so it's critical in my mind, if you're a shipper and you're working with a 3PL or you're working with a broker, that you understand what their rules of engagement are with those assets and what is the vetting process. What tools are you using? What is the tender process like? Because all that becomes part of the legal documentation as you're turning freight over to those assets.
Yeah, so if I can take some of your points and maybe reposition. Yeah, you're right. By the way, you're right. I think it's 95% of all cargo moved in the nation is moved by trucking companies with less than 20 power units or less than 10 power. I mean, it's great.
Right.
A lot of folks don't know that. So you're dealing with onesie twosies and small fleets for the most purposes. So as a shipper, what you're really saying is, hey, listen, know who you're doing business with. Now, you're a shipper. You're not going to tell the broker how to do their job. Don't want to do that. No good deed goes unpunished. You're a shipper. Be a good shipper. I'm a broker, be a good broker. So I would say but you can know who you're doing business with. You have organizations like your own that can understand, hey, here are the right players. Here, these people have been properly vetted. They've had, by the way, attorneys help set them up in the proper way, with the proper insurance, with by the way, proper contracts. Oftentimes missed. Everybody just signs contracts, right? Broker signs motor carrier contract. You can't do that.
How about you don't even see contracts? And, we see so much in our industry where, companies are going out as a shipper or as a receiver to negotiate a transportation program, and all they're looking at is cost, which is, in my mind, just a setup to fail. Becomes this rating exercise versus a really strategic approach to understanding who are my outsourced transportation providers, what is their liability, and what are the best practices in order to do this the right way. Not if I can buy it today for $100 less than yesterday, and oh, by the way, tomorrow I'm going to save another $25. I think that's where companies can really get themselves in trouble. I don't want to talk you out of work though, because it's this balance, right?
It is. So stated differently is, I ask motor carriers who just sign those contracts, how many loads do you have to, this motor carrier, move in order to pay for that one cargo claim? It's astonishing. By the way, Mr. Shipper, how much money did you really save in that cost-cutting affair when you dealt with the wrong motor carrier? Well, that becomes very apparent. Just attorney's fees and cost. If it's a catastrophic claim, it's mind-boggling. Did you see, Jill, that a few weeks or so ago, that there was, ready, a $411 million verdict against the trucking company here in Florida, the largest ever. And it was Top Auto Express. I think Washington was the plaintiff. But it hit all of the transportation media, and it's shocking. Before that, out of Schnitzer Steel out of Texas was $280 million. Shocking. And we could talk about that for the rest of the day we want. But what I would say to you is, in that Top Auto Express, $411 million, you're going to read a lot of stuff on the media out there that is not actually quite accurate. However, Kristen Johnson, my partner here and head of our litigation group, looked it up and actually read the docket and found out what really happened. If you'd like to know, please check out Freight Waves. She was very quickly interviewed by Craig Fuller on Freight Waves. And certainly, if anyone would like to see that, feel free, Jill, to point them to my website or Freight Waves and check that out, find out what really happened there. Why is that important? Well, shippers ought to look at that as well. And
yeah, no, they should.
great education for everyone in the supply chain. Interesting stuff.
So if you are new to the industry and, let's say you're new to supply chain, and supply chain is very, very broad. So maybe we'll drill it down a little. Let's say you are responsible for the transportation relationships, whether at a shipper, whether it's a 3PL, a 4PL, a broker relationship, or direct asset. And you're new to the industry, but you own it. It's your responsibility. Give that person, talk to that person, and give them some tips on where to get started, and where do they go for resources? Where do they go to learn? Could you give us a little bit of that to share with our audience?
Sure. There's nothing that satisfies me more than educating and working with a shipper contract management person or a dispatcher, as they call themselves, at the shipper, or someone within the shipper. So where would I start? Just like anything else. What are the sources, the resources in our industry? Here's the good news, Jill. Because of like this program and other programs, you can learn a lot. So where would I start? Start with consulting logistics and see what you can find out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, and quite frankly, a program like this, to even know, hey, I ought to be looking. I'm responsible for understanding this. Freight Waves that I mentioned earlier. That's a great resource for shippers and everyone in the supply chain. Because here's what's going on every day. And listen, Jill, just like you and I, we see it enough time to go, hey, that's pretty important. Do I really understand that? And then you can hop on to taylorlawpl.com. That's my website, taylorlawpl.com. All kinds of articles and resources in there. And there's organizations, for instance, national organizations like MCIEF, Motor Carrier Insurance Educational Foundation, that in the insurance world, which is very complex. Jill, you and I need to talk about that at some point. Lots of things to talk about that the shipper should understand and that everybody in the supply chain should understand. FTA, Florida Trucking Association, very, very active, very busy in dealing with things. By the way, this should be, I'll give you one, should be incredibly important to the shipper. What you say, well, Jay, what is that? It's tort reform, as you and I have heard it. It's got to happen, Jill. It's got to happen for our industry and for our economy. And here, it's really curbing lawsuit abuse. And so Florida Trucking Association is a leader in pushing that forward, curbing lawsuit abuse. And we've seen a lot of lawsuit abuse. By the way, including some twist in that $411 million verdict that everyone's going to look up now and check out on Freight Waves. But in the law, I should say in the litigation side of things, my firm's been busy. We helped write the amicus brief, that's friend of the court, in the Colonial Freight case. Maybe we'll have a chance at some point to talk about that. But because of the proper ruling there, that curbed some lawsuit abuse concerns. There's the Lopez case right now at the Florida Supreme Court about motions for summary judgment. What is enough? Is it enough that I have video evidence that my motor carrier never left the lane and I was hit from behind? Is that enough? If someone shows up in Florida and says, hey, but I think I saw you change that. Oh, that's enough to survive summary judgment. That's no good. And so hopefully we'll see the right decision on that come down. So you've got the media out there, the good ones. You've got associations, get involved. You've got really Ford in the industry that we don't have a chance to talk about, but maybe we do one day, like BITA, blockchain and transportation. And that's really important. So I'm involved in that, but also autonomous vehicles and IA. There's really good information. If you look on my website, we have some articles recently published in the EDGE report, SAE EDGE report, on the impact of autonomous vehicles on legal and insurance. And does it mean anything to the shipper? It should. All these things are important as we come alongside each other and truly continue to work together. Again, I don't want to sound like shippers are the bad guys, because they're not. But come alongside together and do things better than we ever have before. That's what we
Yeah, I mean, I just think collaboration is key. And if you're responsible at your organization for transportation, what I found in this industry, being in it for 30 years, is so many people want to talk about it, and they want to collaborate, and they want to share, and you can get a whole lot of information from folks in your industry. And so, don't be afraid to reach out. And then when it comes to kind of the legalities of contracts and pricing, and it'd probably be good, JW, just to share your contact information, so that if there's anybody listening, and they do maybe have something internally going on with a carrier, they're concerned, or are they even, are their contracts looking the way they should? Are they missing any key elements of the contract? How can they get in touch with your firm?
Yeah. So, Jill, to answer your question, do you have any listeners that have anything going on inside their transportation, cargo-wise, claim-wise, or contract? Let me go ahead and answer that question 100% yes. I can guarantee it. Here's the problem. It's knowing what question to ask.
Right.
And that's where we can really help, because I know what the question to ask is and what the contract concerns is. Because if we're not looking at the indemnifications properly, and if we're not looking at the insurance, the types of insurance, the limits of insurance, and that's not well done within a contract, we're probably not doing what we need to do.
Right.
To contact me, and I'm certainly love to hear from any of your folks, I'll give my website again. That's the best place, www.taylorlawpl.com. So all my contact information's there. I've got lots of awesome, smart attorneys to help us out too, to come alongside. So we love to hear from any of your folks.
Terrific. And so if you're listening and you do, if this is kind of pulling at your gut, like, I'm not sure I have all my ducks in a row as it relates to really the legalities of shipping. I'm not sure where to start. I would strongly suggest you reach out to JW and his firm. I'm sure you can find them on LinkedIn as well. And I really appreciate you coming on. And I'm wondering too, in the future, if you'd be open, there's so much we could cover here today. I think bringing the awareness that, as in terms of law and transportation, as a shipper, you need to have some level of understanding, and then maybe come back on and join us again. We have a pretty large whiteboarding series, and it's really where we get very specific into claims, chargebacks, transportation contracts, and these type of issues. It'd be really fun maybe to do a case study on one of these, whether it's the 411 million claim, or even just an anonymous claim, to kind of step through the details of what you need to be thinking about in order to avoid a crisis like this.
Let me give you one, Jill. I'll give you
okay,
one.
Good.
Shippers, if you want to say shipper specific, it is a recourse against the shipper. When the broker doesn't pay the motor carrier retains recourse unless what? Well, I can tell you the answers to that, and we can talk about the Oak Harbor cases. That might be a fun one to do.
Yeah, that'd be great. I really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope it was useful to our audience. I'm sure it will be. Like I said, you can find JW Taylor at Taylor & Associates. He left you the website address, and they're certainly on LinkedIn as well. Be sure to hit him up. JW, again, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. I enjoyed it, Jill. Thank you.
Have a great one.
And that's our show. Have a question for JW or Jill? Leave it in the comment section. We'll be sure to get an answer. In the meantime, subscribe and share our show. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.